Everyone knows Ned Flanders, the overly nice, impossibly wholesome neighbor who lives next door to The Simpsons. But what about the house on the other side? That quiet, mysterious place at 740 Evergreen Terrace? A home that's changed hands more times than we can count. Unlike the unshakable consistency of Ned's house, 740 is like a revolving door of chaos, drama, and forgotten characters. It's one of the weirdest patterns in the show. Springfield never ages, characters rarely move, and yet, this one house can't seem to keep a tenant. So what's the deal? Why is 740 Evergreen such a magnet for mayhem? Today, we're digging deep into one of the most niche and overlooked Simpsons mysteries, examining every resident who's lived in that house, what they brought to the show, and how the house itself seems to change depending on who's inside. This is more than just a list of neighbors. It's a weird timeline of failed friendships, disturbing subplots, some of the strangest continuity errors the show has ever seen. And it all begins with two grumpy, unforgettable retirees. Before anyone else claimed the brown house next to The Simpsons, there were Sylvia and Mr. Winfield. They weren't just the first neighbors we ever saw in that location, they were also the most judgmental. From the moment they were introduced, the Winfields were the kind of people who seemed to actively hate their neighbors. In just their third appearance ever, the couple was seen coldly watching Homer stumble down the street, muttering, "Young Simpson is going to kill himself." Not out of concern, just observation. These weren't warm, fuzzy neighbors. They were the kind of folks who call the cops on your dog and spy through their blinds, just waiting for something to complain about. But here's where things get weird. In their early episodes, they didn't even live next door. The Simpsons layout wasn't quite finalized yet, and the Winfields' home seemed to move. First a few houses down, then across the street, and eventually right next door. This isn't a continuity error. This is a pattern. In a world where everything else stays frozen in time, the house at 740 moves. Not literally, but in the way the show treats it. Characters get closer to The Simpsons both emotionally and physically the longer they stay. Sylvia Winfield was voiced by Tracy Ullman, the very same woman who launched The Simpsons on her variety show, and later sued them. Coincidence? Maybe. But it adds a layer of tension to Sylvia's character, especially because her final appearance was kind of iconic. In Season 4's New Kid on the Block, Sylvia tells Homer they're moving and asks for a few small favors. Wear pants, toss some trash, maybe hide the creepy jack-o'-lanterns from last Halloween. Homer, being Homer, responds with a deadpan and proceeds to ignore every request. In fact, he actively sabotages their efforts to sell. He lounges half naked in a kiddie pool, talks to hot dogs, and even hoards estrogen pills he found in their garbage. You know, normal neighborly behavior. But here's the thing. Despite how annoying they were, the Winfields actually felt real. They were cranky, nosy, and judgmental, but also grounded, the kind of suburban retirees that most neighborhoods have. Looking back, they could have been the perfect foil to Ned Flanders. Imagine Homer caught between ultra-sweet Ned and the sour, petty Winfields. Unfortunately, the writers didn't do much with them, and before long the house was vacant once again, ready for a new story. When the Winfields packed up and left, 740 Evergreen Terrace didn't stay quiet for long. In their place came Ruth and Laura Powers, a mother-daughter duo who brought something completely new to the neighborhood. Youth, rebellion, and a refreshing break from the stiff, judgmental energy of the Winfields. Ruth had recently gone through a divorce and moved to Springfield with her teenage daughter, and it didn't take long for the Powers family to get involved with The Simpsons. Bart, of course, instantly fell for Laura. She was the cool older girl, sarcastic, laid back, and into video games and pranks. She babysat for the Simpson kids and seemed genuinely kind, even teaching Maggie how to swear at the cat. But like many side characters on The Simpsons, Laura disappeared almost as quickly as she arrived. After dumping Jimbo Jones, realizing he wasn't nearly as tough as he acted, Laura just vanished. Her story arc ended before it ever really began. But her mom? That's where things got interesting. Ruth Powers could have easily been a forgettable side character, but her dynamic with Marge added surprising depth. In Season 5's Marge on the Lam, the two women bonded over ballet tickets and ended up on a Thelma and Louise-style joyride after Ruth revealed she had borrowed her ex-husband's car. Suddenly, the quiet, rule-following Marge was shooting cans in the desert and fleeing from police in a convertible. It was one of the few times in the series that we saw Marge truly let go, and Ruth was the one who brought that side out of her. Their personalities couldn't have been more different. Ruth was tough, independent, maybe even a little reckless. Marge was cautious, conservative, and constantly weighed down by responsibility. But for one night, they balanced each other. Marge got to be wild, Ruth got to feel supported, and the show hinted at a friendship that could have added real emotional weight to future episodes. But as with most things in The Simpsons, that connection was dropped. Years later, Ruth reappeared in the strong arms of the Ma, where we learned she'd done time in prison, taken up bodybuilding, and had been crowned Miss Mexican Mafia 3 years in a row. Yes, really. She was reintroduced not as a friend, but as a gym buddy who encouraged Marge to bulk up using less than natural methods. What started as Marge's attempt to regain confidence after a traumatic mugging spiraled into steroid abuse, violent outbursts, and arguably one of the darkest turns for her character in the entire series. And while Ruth didn't force Marge into this path, her influence was clearly the tipping point. It's unclear what happened to Laura during Ruth's prison time. She was never mentioned again, and the writers quietly swept the Powers family back under the rug. But that wasn't the end, not entirely. In one episode, the house was put on the market again, with Homer and Marge visiting the open house purely to gawk at how much nicer the kitchen was. Neither Ruth nor Laura were mentioned. In fact, it felt like they'd never lived there at all. Even stranger, decades later, season 33 casually dropped the line that Ruth had been living there all along. "You haven't stopped by in 25 years and I live next door," she tells Marge. Huh? What happened to all those other neighbors? What happened to the house's multiple redesigns? The show never explains, and honestly, it doesn't even try to. The Powers family is a perfect example of what happens when The Simpsons teases rich, character-driven stories and then tosses them aside for the next gag. Ruth and Marge could have had a deep, long-running friendship. Laura could have become a recurring character in Bart's world. Instead, they were forgotten, revived, and forgotten again, living in a house that seems to reset itself every time someone moves out. And if you think that's strange, wait until you hear who moved in next. If you thought nosy retirees and rebellious single moms were wild, wait until Sideshow Bob literally hijacks the house next door. In one of the most twisted plots The Simpsons ever pulled off, the brown house at 740 Evergreen Terrace became the launchpad for a full-blown identity theft scheme. And it all started with someone named Walt Warren. At first glance, Walt seemed like the perfect neighbor. Polite, quiet, generous. He even brought over homemade caramel apples and offered the family free Wi-Fi. Everyone welcomed him instantly. Everyone except Bart. Something about Walt's voice sent a chill down Bart's spine. Because it was too familiar, too calm, too evil. Bart became convinced that Walt was actually Sideshow Bob, his longtime nemesis, somehow back from prison and living right next door. No one believed him. Not Lisa, not Marge, not even Homer. But Bart couldn't shake the feeling. He even tried to trap Walt with a performance of Gilbert and Sullivan, a favorite of Bob's, but Walt didn't flinch. He smiled. He watered his lawn. He hung up a birdhouse. Everything about him screamed normal, but Bart was right. The truth? Walt Warren was Sideshow Bob. The real Walt had been Bob's cellmate, and when Bob found out Walt was about to be released, he used plastic surgery to swap faces. Literally. Bob stole Walt's identity, left the real Walt behind bars, and moved in next to The Simpsons to finally carry out his most elaborate plan yet. And this plan? It was next level insane. Bob didn't just want to kill Bart. He wanted to murder him in the Five Corners, a real-life geographical oddity where 5 U.S. states meet. Why? Because if he killed Bart while straddling 5 jurisdictions, no single state could claim authority. It was the ultimate loophole, the perfect crime. But as always, Bob underestimated Bart. And while the real Walt, still wearing Bob's surgically grafted face, escaped from prison, Bart managed to stall long enough for police from all 5 states to intervene. The plan collapsed. Bob was exposed, and Walt quite understandably moved out as fast as possible. Now here's the weird part. Despite being home to one of the darkest storylines in Simpsons history, 740 Evergreen Terrace just resets again. Gone are the ominous Bart shrines on the bedroom ceiling. Gone is the white to brown paint job. Gone is the whole vibe of horror. The house goes right back to being boring and plain, as if none of it ever happened. But this storyline shows something deeper about the brown house. It's not just a recurring location. It's a blank slate for chaos. Every time someone new moves in, the tone of the show shifts. With the Winfields, it was suburban tension. With Ruth Powers, emotional growth and rebellion. With Bob, it became a psychological thriller. So once again, the question is, why is this the only house in Springfield that never stays the same? Whatever the reason, as soon as the dust settled, 740 was ready for the next nightmare neighbor. And this time, it was someone dangerously familiar. After surviving Sideshow Bob's face-swapping insanity, you'd think things might quiet down for 740 Evergreen Terrace. But instead of introducing a new character with drama or danger, the show took a very different route. Enter Ted Flanders, Ned's cousin. Now before you go searching your memory for a deep Ted Flanders subplot, don't bother. He only appears once for a single gag. But it's a strange and telling moment in the timeline of this house. In a closing scene, we're suddenly introduced to Ted and his family as they wave politely from next door. The punchline? Homer now lives between 2 Flanders households. The horror. The implication is clear. This isn't just a house for recurring characters or short-term tenants. It's also used as a comedic tool, a sandbox the writers dip into when they want to shake up Homer's world. And while we never get to know Ted, his personality, his job, or even whether he's left-handed like Ned, the joke lands because of what it represents. Homer's entire dynamic with Ned is built on that contrast. Ned is polished, patient, God-fearing, Homer is Homer. But having two of them next door? That's not just annoying, that's existentially terrifying. Of course, we never find out what happens to Ted and his family. They vanish immediately with no explanation, never referenced again, which fits the pattern perfectly. Characters show up, change everything or nothing, and then disappear. The brown house resets. But here's a theory, maybe Homer scared them off? Maybe his desperate need to avoid a second round of Flanders drove him to do something truly Homer-level absurd. Maybe Ted wasn't as sweet as he seemed. We'll never know. And maybe that's the point. Still, this moment showed that 740 Evergreen Terrace isn't just for side characters or sinister plots. It can be a tool for meta-commentary, a wink at the audience, and a way for the show to break its own patterns, even if only for a moment. But if you think things were weird with a fake Flanders, just wait until 740 becomes the epicenter of the hipster apocalypse. And while we never get to know Ted, his personality, his job, or even whether he's left-handed like Ned, the joke lands because of what it represents. Homer's entire dynamic with Ned is built on that contrast. Ned is polished, patient, God-fearing. Homer is Homer. But having two of them next door? That's not just annoying, that's existentially terrifying. Of course, we never find out what happens to Ted and his family. They vanish immediately with no explanation, never referenced again, which fits the pattern perfectly. Characters show up, change everything or nothing, and then disappear. The brown house resets. But here's a theory, maybe Homer scared them off? Maybe his desperate need to avoid a second round of Flanders drove him to do something truly Homer-level absurd. Maybe Ted wasn't as sweet as he seemed. We'll never know, and maybe that's the point. So where did they end up? You guessed it, 740 Evergreen Terrace? And just like that, the humble brown house was reborn. The exterior was covered in sleek stone brickwork, patio seating, and modern landscaping. Inside, it became practically unrecognizable. Open floor plans, giant windows, a skylight, even books stored in the fireplace because, of course, bookshelves are too mainstream. The Powers family had upgraded the place, but Terrence? He rebranded it. Homer was instantly hooked. Terrence treated him like an equal, like someone still relevant, still cool. And so began one of Homer's most ridiculous identity shifts. He started dressing differently, acting differently, even shaved off his signature 3 hairs to match Terrence's goatee. Marge was skeptical but supportive until it became clear that the two families were not on the same wavelength. Emily, Terrence's wife, was the worst kind of self-righteous intellectual. She had a graduate degree in mid-century kitchenware, judged Marge for not breastfeeding, and read ironic newspapers that probably came with a vinyl soundtrack. Meanwhile, their son, T-Rex, was just as pretentious, mocking Bart and rejecting any semblance of normal childhood joy. He was the kid who turned his nose up at Uno. The tension between families peaked at T-Rex's birthday party, held in an abandoned slaughterhouse, of course. Marge had finally had enough of Emily's judgmental friends. Bart got into a fight with T-Rex, and the entire hipster-fueled friendship fell apart. But the real punchline came afterward. Springfield became too cool. So cool, in fact, that the New York Times named it the trendiest town in America. And you know what that means? It instantly stopped being cool. Terrence and his crew packed up and moved on, because nothing says hipster like fleeing the very thing you helped build. This arc, Season 24's The Day the Earth Stood Cool, wasn't just parody. It was commentary on identity, trend chasing, and Homer's endless search for self-worth. It also marked the most extreme physical transformation of the brown house in Simpsons history. And then, as always, the house reset. No more skylights, no more stone patio. Just back to that plain brown box we all recognize. And honestly, that might be the most Springfield thing of all. Just when you thought the brown house had seen it all, from old folks to bodybuilders, from murderers to mustachioed cousins, it got hit with a modern menace, McMansion culture. Enter Anne and Thea Blackburn. Now, these weren't your typical nosy neighbors or misunderstood weirdos. The Blackburns were polished, wealthy, and oozing with fake friendliness. The kind of people who smile while stepping on your neck. Figuratively, of course. They rolled into Springfield with smiles, small talk, and big renovation plans. But beneath the manicured charm was a ruthless agenda. Turn the humble house at 740 Evergreen Terrace into a suburban monstrosity. It all started when Homer and Thea hit it off over pickleball and ice cream. Anne took Marge for massages. Everything seemed innocent enough, just two couples forming a neighborly bond. But Homer couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why were they being so nice? Then came the ask. We just need a few tiny tweaks to the house. Tweaks, 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 tweaks. What followed wasn't a renovation. It was an invasion. The Blackburns leveled the house and erected a giant white McMansion, complete with a bell tower and a footprint so large it literally blocked out the Simpsons' sunlight. And while Homer was momentarily distracted by the flashy new car they lent him from their dealership, the truth hit hard. They weren't trying to be friends. They were using the Simpsons to greenlight a total neighborhood takeover. Things got even worse when asbestos was dumped into the Simpsons' backyard. But when Homer confronted Ann and Thea, they were conveniently on vacation, dodging accountability with the kind of practiced smoothness that only rich, manipulative neighbors can pull off. But here's where it gets really good. Lisa and local brainiac Hubert Wong discovered that 740 Evergreen Terrace and the surrounding neighborhood was actually built on the original site where Jebediah Springfield founded the town, which meant that the street was now classified as a historic district. Translation? The Blackburn's mansion was illegal. Homer used this bombshell to finally confront the couple, and in a rare moment of self-awareness, he realized that all they ever wanted was his silence, not his friendship. The fallout was immediate. Thea's dealership collapsed under the scandal. The McMansion dream crumbled, and just like that, the Blackburns vanished. We never saw the inside of their garish mega home. We never saw them show an ounce of remorse. Their storyline, like their relationship with The Simpsons, was hollow, fake, and forgettable by design. And in the end, the house returned, again, to its modest brown self. No bell tower, no ego, just walls, a door, and a mailbox, waiting for the next disaster to move in. What makes this story so relatable is how real it feels. We've all had neighbors who seem great until they aren't. People who smile while pushing boundaries, taking space, and slowly making your life miserable. The Simpsons turned that very real anxiety into one of the most satisfying payoffs in the entire 740 saga. But the Blackburns were just the latest reminder that 740 Evergreen Terrace is a mirror. So what's the deal with this one house? Why does 740 Evergreen Terrace keep shape-shifting, while the rest of Springfield stays stuck in eternal sameness? The answer isn't just a quirky writing choice, it's a clever storytelling tool. The Simpsons famously ignore continuity, but this house is an exception. It's a blank canvas for the writers to explore different themes, character dynamics, and jokes without changing the core world too much. Think about it. Ned Flanders' house stays pristine, reflecting his perfect, orderly life. The Simpsons' home stays consistent because it's the heart of the show, familiar, comforting, unchanging. But 740? It's a wild card. Each new occupant reflects a different cultural moment or storytelling need. The Winfield showed suburban grumpiness and neighborly tension. The Powers family brought friendship, rebellion, and even a dark dive into Marge's struggles. Sideshow Bob's takeover was a psychological thriller right in the suburbs. The Flanders cousins joke explored Homer's discomfort with too much neighborly perfection. The Terrence hipster era mocked modern trend chasing and identity crises. And the Blackburn McMansion saga tapped into fears of gentrification, fake friendships, and loss of community. By constantly reinventing 740 Evergreen Terrace, The Simpsons keep their storytelling fresh. It's like a reset button that lets writers bring in new conflicts, explore social commentary, or introduce bizarre humor without breaking the show's core setup. But this also creates a deeper contrast. The house next door symbolizes change and chaos, while the rest of the neighborhood symbolizes order and routine. This is why the house's changing design is so important too. It's rarely just decoration. It tells you about who lives inside and what kind of story you're about to get. A pristine white house means coldness and distance. A rundown brown house means humble, everyday life. A flashy McMansion screams greed and excess. And it's that tension between permanence and change that keeps the dynamic between Homer and Ned so entertaining. Ned's perfect, unchanging home is the ideal Homer envies and resents. Meanwhile, 740 Evergreen Terrace is a revolving door of personalities Homer has to deal with, or sometimes tries desperately to befriend. It's a small but brilliant detail that makes Springfield feel both familiar and unpredictable at the same time. So what can we take away from the wild history of 740 Evergreen Terrace? This brown house isn't just a background prop. It's a storytelling playground that captures the chaos, comedy, and contradictions of life next door. Whether it's nosy retirees, mysterious strangers, hipster invasions, or manipulative millionaires, the house has seen it all and reset just as quickly. The ever-changing neighbors remind us that behind every door is a new story waiting to unfold. They keep the show fresh, surprising, and sometimes even a little unsettling. And while Springfield itself is famously stuck in time, this one house is always moving forward, always shaking things up. It's the perfect metaphor for life, sometimes stable, sometimes unpredictable, always filled with characters you never quite forget. Next time you watch The Simpsons, glance over at 740 Evergreen Terrace. You might not recognize who's living there or what the house looks like, but one thing's for sure, it'll never be boring. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed diving into the mysteries of Springfield's most mysterious neighbor, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives, just like this. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the stories behind the screen.